There is a village called Deer Hollow, tucked so far into the hills that even the birds forgot to fly over it. Dirt paths tangled through it like roots, and fog slept low each morning, curling around stone wells and sloping rooftops. The houses leaned as if whispering to one another. At the edge of this quiet, time-worn place lived old Merton, a man made of earth and habit. Merton had lived 76 years by the same field, his pasture, though he never called it that out loud. It was the wide, open stretch beyond the Willow Creek, a sloping piece of land painted with clover and the gold of dandelions. Children used to run through it in spring, chasing wind and laughter. These days, only birds and the occasional lost sheep ventured there, yet it remained the center of Merton's world. He mended its fences with care, walked its edge each morning, and sat beneath its lone sycamore to sip tea and listen to the hush of things that no one else heard anymore. To the town, he was just old Merton, slow-walking, always muttering to himself, smelling faintly of wool and pine oil. They nodded politely but didn't linger. He'd been a widower for 20 years and spoke more to his late wife's headstone than to people. Still, he was never unkind, and in Deer Hollow, that counted. But on a certain Tuesday in late autumn, something shifted. It began with strangers, 3 of them, pulling up in a glossy black car that looked foreign against the mud-caked road. They stepped out in boots too clean, with eyes that scanned everything and understood nothing. One walked straight into the mayor's modest house. The other 2 paced, eyes narrowing on the pasture. Merton watched from his porch, fingers still around the handle of a chipped tin mug. He didn't move. Didn't blink. He only watched. By evening, whispers had blown through the village like dry leaves. The government was building something, just a drill site, they said. Temporary. Harmless. For national defense. No one knew what it meant, not exactly, but people closed their windows early that night. In Deer Hollow, anything new had teeth. That night, Merton stood at the edge of his pasture under a sky heavy with stars. He dug his boots into the soil. He remembered when the Willow Creek used to flood each spring and he and Elsie would scoop tadpoles into jars. He remembered the summer she'd planted wildflowers along the fence line, so the bees would have something to come back to. They still bloomed. He touched the gatepost gently, like greeting an old friend. "I won't let them take it," he whispered. His voice was low, but the wind heard him. The next day came with noise, big trucks growling up the road, soldiers unfolding like ants in patterns of green and gray. They brought wire, flags, clipboards. They didn't ask, only informed. Merton stood in their path, arms crossed over his chest, spine straight. "This here's my land," he said. "Been in my hands since my grandfather was a boy." A man with sunglasses and a folder didn't even glance up. Requisitioned. Article 73, subsection B. Signed by the county. National interest. Interest in what? In what's underneath. They posted signs, sunk metal stakes, and told him it would only be for a few weeks. Drills. Testing. Nothing more. By sunset, the fences were up. He sat on his porch again, but his tea went cold. Beyond the fence, men with radios and heavy boots stomped across his grass, turning earth that had never known such cruelty. One tank had already arrived, its treads carving deep scars into the land. No one from the village came to speak with him. They walked quicker past his house now, eyes down. The baker's boy who once waved every morning pretended not to see him. It wasn't malice, just the quiet survival Deer Hollow had always practiced. When trouble came, they folded inward and waited for it to pass. Merton didn't sleep that night. He walked his property line with a lantern and a silence so thick it pressed on the lungs. He stopped at the sycamore tree, looked at the ground, and lowered himself with a grunt to rest against the trunk. He remembered the night Elsie had gone cold in his arms. He hadn't cried then, not really. He just sat in this very spot until dawn came and the birds returned to their old songs. And he remembered what she had told him the spring before, "There's a kind of love you don't shout about. You just keep showing up for it, even when no one's watching." So he sat there watching, showing up. In the distance, another truck arrived. Its headlights swept the field, catching briefly on a patch of wildflowers still standing. Merton clenched his jaw. He didn't know what came next, only that the land was no longer quiet, and neither was he. The morning broke not with the crow of a rooster, but with the low growl of engines that did not belong to any farm. Merton was already awake, standing by his window as headlights crept up the dirt road like unwelcome guests. They came in a line, 6 trucks, a command jeep, and a rumbling carrier dragging a tank like a chained beast. The sun had not yet risen, but already the day smelled of oil and smoke. By the time he stepped onto his porch, the pasture was no longer his. Uniformed men moved quickly, uncoiling wires, hammering stakes, measuring the land as if it were a lifeless thing. They didn't look up, didn't speak to him. The tank was parked square in the center of the field, its turret pointed toward the hills like it was expecting a war that hadn't come yet. Merton walked to the edge of the newly installed fence, the kind with sharp coils on top and warning signs every 10 feet. A soldier with a plastic badge around his neck noticed him but didn't speak until Merton did. "You think this land will hold you?" Merton asked, voice calm as river stone. The soldier blinked. "Not my call, sir. Didn't say it was. I'm just a skin." Orders came from higher up. Base setup. Nothing permanent. Merton looked past the man, past the tangled wires and crawling cables, to where the wildflowers had been. Flattened. Crushed. A yellow smear on the tire tracks. "Nothing's permanent," he said quietly and turned back toward his house. The village didn't say a word. The next market day came and went, quieter than usual. People moved around the soldiers without looking them in the eyes. Some tried to justify it. "Just for training," said the butcher. "Probably over in a week," said the postmaster. But they all glanced nervously toward Merton's home, now sitting in the shadow of machines. For 3 days, Merton did not enter the pasture. He sat on his porch with a journal in his lap and a pencil in his hand, though he never wrote a word. His eyes never strayed far from the fence. At night, the field lit up in artificial daylight, floodlights powered by generators that muttered into the dark. He could see them from his bedroom, soldiers walking patrols, tank engines coughing awake, radio chatter humming like mosquitoes. On the 4th night, the rain returned. It was not a storm, but a steady drizzle, the kind that softened the earth and drew the scent of pine from the woods. Merton stood in it, hatless, boots sinking slightly into the mud at the edge of the field. No one noticed him. They never looked beyond the fence. He walked slowly, circling around the property line until he reached the back corner, where a thicket of brush hid what the soldiers hadn't seen, a dip in the ground, nearly invisible unless you'd known it since childhood. There, beneath the roots of the sycamore tree, lay the entrance to a narrow, hand-dug tunnel. His grandfather had called it the spring vein. It had once been a passage for water, used during dry years to irrigate the far side of the field. The family had covered it decades ago with earth and stone, but Merton had never forgotten. He knelt, fingers probing the soil until he found the old latch, rusted but still intact. With a grunt, he pried it open. A damp breath of earth rose to meet him. He lit a lantern and crawled in. Inside, the tunnel was tighter than he remembered, the wooden supports creaking with age. Roots dangled from above like spider legs. But the spring still trickled faintly along the side, weaving its way through stones and broken leaves. He moved slowly, careful not to disturb too much. The far end opened just beneath the center of the pasture, where the tank now rested. Merton sat there a long while, listening. The machines above vibrated through the earth in dull pulses, but here, underground, it felt like being inside the memory of the land. He ran his fingers along the dirt wall and began to think. Not of revenge, not of sabotage, but of weight, of pressure, of water and time. He spent the next day gathering old tools, shovels with splintered handles, rusted pulleys, buckets, and tarps. From his barn, he pulled ropes and levers, the kinds of things most people wouldn't know how to use anymore. He didn't explain himself. He didn't speak to anyone. Each night, he worked in silence, widening the tunnel's far end, loosening the soil directly beneath the tank's weight. He redirected the water flow with carved trenches and old gutters, letting it seep into the earth just enough to soften it. His hands blistered. His knees ached. But he did not stop. The land had never betrayed him. He wasn't about to betray it. On the seventh day, the rain returned heavier than before. Thunder rolled over the hills, and the creek swelled. Merton stood at the entrance of the tunnel, holding a small wooden token in his hand, a whittled carving of a wildflower, smoothed by time. He kissed it once and placed it at the mouth of the spring vein, tucked among the stones. He looked up at the tank, rain bouncing off its hull like curses. Soldiers scrambled for cover, radios squawking in the chaos. No one noticed the faint depression forming beneath the machine. No one noticed Merton watching. He stepped back under the sycamore and waited, not for an explosion or a collapse, but for silence. And then, for the first time in a week, he smiled. It happened at dawn. The rain had softened the field all night, turning the ground to something no longer firm, no longer trustworthy. Beneath the steel beast in the center, the soil had begun to sag minute by minute. And still, the soldiers did not see it. Their eyes were on maps, schedules, and digital screens, not on the earth beneath their feet. Old Merton, however, had never looked away. From his porch, he watched as the tank listed forward slightly, like a tired animal buckling at the knees. One of the soldiers noticed and called it in, but by then the Pasture had already made its choice. With a groan like the opening of an ancient door, the center of the field gave way. The tank didn't explode. It simply vanished, nose first, as the earth swallowed it whole. A tremendous clatter followed, the shriek of metal, the crunch of soil, and then, silence. Rainwater rushed in after it, hissing as it touched the hot engine. Panic broke through the ranks. Radios burst to life. Men ran, shouting over one another, trying to secure the perimeter. Someone ordered an evacuation of heavy equipment. Someone else demanded a geological survey. But the land had already spoken, and no order could unspeak it. Merton stood slowly and walked to the fence line. His coat hung heavy with water, hat low over his brow. He didn't smile. Didn't gloat. He only watched the chaos unfold with the steady gaze of a man who had buried 2 generations and remembered the names of every tree on his property. A captain finally approached him, young, clean-shaven, face pale with urgency. "Sir, you need to clear the area. This land has become unstable." Merton's eyes narrowed. "That's so?" "Yes." The tank sank into a cavity. May have been some sort of old irrigation system. "Frankly, you're lucky your house hasn't. That old system saved this town from famine during the drought of 46, Merton said flatly. And again in 73, when the wells went dry. You're standin' on more history than you'll ever read in your briefings." The captain blinked, lips parting to speak, but found no words. Merton leaned on the fence, the barbed wire inches from his calloused hand. "I warned you. This land don't hold strangers kindly." The captain exhaled and turned away, radioing something Merton couldn't hear. By afternoon, the trucks began to retreat. First the supply units, then the smaller transports. They left deep gouges in the road, tracks that would take weeks to smooth. The tank was not recovered. It remained buried, half visible in the sinkhole like the fossil of some ancient predator that had wandered too far from its time. News crews came next, arriving in vans with bright logos and eager microphones. The villagers who had kept their distance for days now gathered in clumps near the chapel and the grocer's porch. No one had expected this. No one had spoken to Merton yet, though they all glanced his way as though seeing him for the first time. A young reporter approached. She had the kind of polished voice meant for evening broadcasts and crisis updates. "Sir, did you know about the collapse risk?" Merton looked at her. "I know the land. Was this sabotage? I watered that soil with my own sweat for 6 decades. Is it sabotage to ask a man to respect his own footprints?" "But the government says..." "The government don't sleep in a house that creaks when the rain comes. Don't see the way the soil lifts before a thaw. Don't feel the ache in its knees when the weather shifts. I do." The camera blinked red. The reporter blinked confusion. But the townsfolk behind her were nodding, just barely, as if waking from some long, quiet slumber. Later that evening, the mayor came in person, his hat crumpled in his hands like a confession. "Merton, I'm sorry." Merton didn't reply at first. He was at the pasture's edge again, watching the sun bleed gold across the horizon. I should have fought harder, the mayor said. Should have asked questions. Merton turned. This town's been silent too long. Ain't just your fault. Ain't just mine. We let them take things without saying no. The mayor looked at the sinkhole, now roped off with caution tape and guarded by no one. What do we do now? We remember, Merton said. We mend what we can. And next time someone comes to pave over our memories, we make sure they know there's roots here. That night, for the first time in a week, the floodlights were gone. The stars came back, each one sharp as a chisel against the sky. The village slept lighter, and the earth, though still damp, felt steadier. Merton sat beneath the sycamore again, hands resting on his knees. In his lap was a small box, wooden, hand-carved, old. Inside lay keepsakes, a wedding ring, a sprig of dried wildflowers, and a folded note in Elsie's handwriting. He opened it and read it once more. Hold fast. Love like the land. Quietly. Deeply. Without needing to be seen. He folded it again and set it back inside. Somewhere beyond the trees, an owl called into the darkness. Merton answered with silence. In the morning he would walk to the village square. He would speak not in anger, but in memory. And this time, the town would listen.